neat idea, and I really got kind of excited to see this. And there's one table, it's Florida Eagle Forum there. It's a table right out here. They have these erasers. And it says on these erasers, erase Common Core. And then it says, or whatever you're naming it today. And on that, and basically what they've got here is they've got a stamped envelope. And what you do is you take these erasers and you take an ink pen and you put your name on it and where you're from. And then you give it to 4 other friends to do the very same thing. You take these erasers and you put them all in the envelope like that. You seal it up. And there's an address there. Let me see what the address is. It says Office of Governor Rick Scott. Anyway, it's got the address on there. So I would encourage you to take a look at those. Those are, I think, they're $5, and pretty much it covers the cost of it. So it's a great idea. There's about 4,000 erasers. When they leave today, they need none. Okay? Thank you. I'm going to introduce our first guest. We have a very, very full and very tight schedule. We have a lot to cover. We have some very dynamic speakers. We have some speakers today that have great knowledge on the subject of education. The first one I want to introduce is Laura Caruso. Laura Caruso she's actually with Florida Family Policy Council, and she's a native here in Florida. She's married to her best friend, Brent, from University of Central Florida. They've been married for 24 years. They're parents of a junior, Kaylin, at Liberty University in Lynchburg. And Laura has 10 years experience in public relations and serves 8 years as a co-director of Team Homeschool Cooperative in St. Cloud, Florida. Her involvement in home education began with Kayla's 3rd grade year that ignited a renewed love of learning and on the enthusiasm for recovering and teaching the untold stories and often unrecognized first principles of our nation. Today, she's an instructional support for homeschool educating families by teaching Latin classes, as well as American history and government. She also leads field study tours to important historical sites such as St. Augustine, Jamestown, Williamsburg, Yorktown, and Washington, D.C. Laura served 3 years as a Florida State Coordinator for Teen Pack Leadership Schools, a nationwide organization that trains young leaders to incorporate faith and political understanding to impact the culture. She worked as a field director for Florida Family Action during the last presidential election, and is working with the Florida Family Policy Council on the issue of Common Core. Please give a warm welcome to Laura Caruso.
Got it. They promised me there was a clicker up here. It's a handy tool. Randy, that was most gracious, and I just also want to echo his thanks to Eastland, the members of Eastland, for allowing us to be here today to discuss what's a very, very important topic, especially in our state, Florida. I want to open by saying that something is very wrong in the state of Florida when the most dramatic and far-reaching shift in education policy in your lifetimes has been developed, has been adopted by your state, and is 2.5 years into implementation, and we're really just finding out about it. That's a problem. Okay, guys, my clicker's not operating. Thank you. All right, there we are. All right. Let me start by saying we're here today to talk about several educational reform areas, but the first that I'm going to speak to you about today is the Common Core. We're hearing lots about it. You see it outside in the foyer, and I want to define a few terms for us. When we talk about Common Core standards, the standards themselves are literally the list of things that students should know year by year. The problem is the standards as they're written now, these national standards, are not just addressing academics. There are methodologies that are woven into the standards, as well as behavioral expectations, attitudes, that kind of thing. That's very problematic. The standards are one element of the whole education picture. So those of us that aren't in education professionally, we need to know the lingo. So the standards are that list. The tests are another component, the assessments. And then in the middle, we have the curriculum. Those are the lesson plans, the textbooks, the online resources that are used to accomplish the standards so that they can be measured by the test. So hopefully we can all be clear on that. So what we're here today to discuss are the Common Core state standards. The standards came into the state of Florida on the signatures of two men, and I've shown you, here they are, former Governor Charlie Crist and former Commissioner of Education Eric Smith. When they were adopted in January 2010, when we signed on the dotted line, in January of 2010, there were no public hearings. There was no big public relations campaign. Some of you are aware that on Fox News now there are these wonderful campaigns out there to promote Common Core. None of that was happening back in January 2010 when we signed on the dotted line and said we'd take them. And by the way, guys, the standards had not been released yet. They signed on the dotted line for something that they had not yet seen. They were not released until March of 2010. Just to remind you of anything?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, we have to sign up before we know what's in it. So again, there are no public hearings, no legislative briefings at the time. As late as last year, we were meeting with education committee members who literally said, we don't know what Common Core is. And we were already 2 years down the road, and your legislators are left out of the loop. And they are your connection to your government. They didn't know. They came out of two private, unaccountable, Washington, D.C. based organizations, the National Governors Association, and this is a big one, the Council of Chief State School Officers. And while these two groups may sound governmental, they are private, they are unaccountable, they do not answer to any legislature, they do not have to answer Freedom of Information Act requests from the media, and they don't. Their meetings are private, as are their proceedings. They developed the Common Core standards. They were funded. I'm going to tell you a little bit about their funding. They received, y'all see the little hats there on the side, the Uncle Sam hats. Both of these organizations receive 40% of their funding from the federal government. So you need to understand there are federal fingerprints. You'll keep hearing this is state-led, but I want to show you about the federal intrusion. These organizations who copyrighted the standards are 40% funded by the federal government. Another 20% of their funding comes from private foundations who have an interest in educational policy. Groups like the Gates Foundation, or the Broad Foundation, or the Walton Foundation. In 2007, a $60 million grant was given to these two organizations to develop national standards. This is a great idea. We want you guys to run with it, 2007, which they did. Then in 2009 came an opportunity to move this policy down to the states. That happened with the Race to the Top program. We were in the midst of the recession. Things were not going well in the states. They were cash strapped. And so here came the opportunity to really incentivize the states to adopt these national standards. There was a $4.35 billion grant program established. If you wanted to apply for a piece of that pot, there was an application you filled out. And one of the boxes that you needed to check said this, that you would adopt internationally benchmarked, you'll notice the blue, standards and assessments. That's what we're committing to. We would adopt these standards and assessments, and then the key phrase, that are common to many states. It didn't matter if you had great standards in your state, quite frankly, we did. Our standards were ranked equal, at least equal to the Common Core, and in fact higher in the math area. But we checked the box anyway. Now, nobody had common standards. Every state had its own unique standards, and in fact, that's what's designed by, that's what's supposed to happen. The federal government is not supposed to have their hands in local education. Standards are supposed to be developed by the states, and that's how it had always been. So here we are. We have 2 months to get this application in. So did we rush out and call Georgia and South Carolina, and boy, we better work on some common standards? No, there was a package all ready for us that came from those two Washington, D.C. based organizations, all tied up in a nice bow and labeled Common Core. So we checked the box, we took Common Core. Why didn't you know about it? Well, they didn't want you to know about it. They didn't think you'd care, but y'all care. And I'm grateful that you care. When people find out about it, they are almost unanimously opposed to the standards once they understand what this really is. So they knew that that would be the response, and they didn't want you to know. So here's the way that you were supposed to find out. There were literally 2 months where the standards were placed on flstandards.org, and then they adopted them. That's it. Are y'all following flstandards.org on your Facebook and your Twitter and all that? You get all the, I don't either. So nobody knew. They had a dismal response, 433 public comments, that's it. To give you a comparison, after the public began to rise up and there was an outcry, Governor Scott asked that there be 3 public hearings across the state. They reopened that website for a month and took public comment. In 1 month, they had more than 19,000 public comments. It's the most they've ever had in the history of the state related to standards, ever. So that tells you something. Something's wrong in the state of Florida. Why you didn't know about it is essentially because we're experiencing a clash of worldviews. Who is responsible for the education of children? And who knows best what children need? Is it big government? Is it big business? Is it education elites? Folks that think they know and they're going to dictate down to the masses. Well, we happen to have a guy, we may agree with him on many issues, but Governor Bush, former Governor Bush, is on the wrong side of this one. And he has taken $10 million, probably more, but there's $10 million I can track, from the Gates Foundation, specifically to promote the implementation of Common Core. He's very vocal, and they're out there in force, working on this. Every now and then, back up real quick, I want to give away my punchline. Every now and then, those education elites that I speak of, what they're thinking kind of leaks out, and we can see, we get a little window into how they're thinking. And so I have 2 examples of that are fairly recent. The first is an MSNBC host. She is an education correspondent, and she recently taped a little promotional item. And in her promo, she says this: we have to break through our private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families and recognize that kids belong to whole communities. Guys, that's dangerous. I'm glad that's the response. Sometimes I say that, and it takes people a minute to process. And that's dangerous when we aren't aware. We aren't aware of the threat. Also, just a couple weeks ago, there was a Common Core panel, and a former Commissioner of Education from Massachusetts spoke. His name is Paul Reville. And during the discussion, he said, well, we have to take care of these kids. We have to have common standards. I mean, gosh, what if Georgia's standards are worse? I'm not picking on Georgia. Mississippi or whoever, what if their standards are worse? It's just not fair because, after all, children belong to all of us, he said. Well, I would contend that children do not belong to all of us. Amen. Children are a gift of God. Children, first and foremost, belong to God, and they are given to their parents as a reward. And they are given to their parents to faithfully steward. And so parents must have responsibility for their own children's education. Now, can they delegate the process of educating? Yes, they can. But they must never, ever be stripped of the responsibility and authority over their child's education. I've just given you a couple examples. Isaiah speaks of the children whom the Lord has given to me. I'm to steward them. It's clear in Scripture that parents are responsible for bringing children up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. I just picked one, but we could be here for an hour, really exploring that topic. And in our founding era, it was very clear that this was the prevailing worldview. We can look at Webster's 1828 dictionary. And y'all, I find this fascinating now that I'm a history mama. But we can understand what our founders thought about government and marriage and family if we just go to a dictionary from that time period. And Noah Webster, called the founding father of American scholarship and education, gave us an incredible resource, the first American dictionary to the English language. If we look up marriage, the definition there is going to be very different than what we find in the dictionary today. If we look at the definition of educate, we can see the worldview of the founders. I'm just going to direct you to the very end there, the very bottom. To educate children well is one of the most important duties of the civil government.
No.
That is not what our founders said. To educate children well was one of the most important duties of parents and guardians. They got it. So again, parents may delegate the process, but they may never delegate their responsibility. They must give an answer one day before God for how they have stewarded those children. Responsibility, however, if you're going to be held responsible, you must have authority and control, and that is the problem with Common Core. It strips that away from parents and from local school districts. States, when these standards were adopted, they were adopted as a package, a copyrighted package, adopted by 45 states. So these are not customizable, except we were given this little out. States are given the freedom to add 15% to the standards, but must still teach the original standards. So what happened just a couple weeks ago was our State Board of Education sprinkled a few standards on top, made a few copy edits, and then renamed the package. And said, okay, well, it's not Common Core anymore. I'm telling you, you guys, I ran into people in the halls in Tallahassee this week telling me, oh, Common Core's gone. No, Common Core is not gone. We've rebranded it as you were instructed. We still retain 99.2% of the original standards, and then have sprinkled a few things on top. And I've told you that, okay. I want you to know, too, that was the game from the beginning. It was to control all three components of this process, not just the standards. Because we go, oh, it's just a list, okay, maybe we can live with that. We shouldn't be living with that, but it's more than just the standards. And Bill Gates kind of gave that away in an interview in 2009, or speaking engagement, where he said identifying common standards is not enough. We will know we've succeeded when the curriculum and the tests align to the standards. He said when the tests are aligned to the standards, the curriculum will line up as well. And so, folks, we've lost control of all three of the important components of education policy. We really do not have local control. You'll keep hearing that. You have local control, you have local control. Well, you can choose from all the things that line up with Common Core and that are going to be tested on the nationally aligned test. The Common Core Initiative is a massive assault on parental rights and local control of education. That is why Florida Family Policy Council has taken a position opposing Common Core and supporting the legislation that is currently being considered that would pause Common Core in our state and allow for a lot more input on the part of the public. The good news is this. This is a map that I used in presentations a few months ago showing resistance to Common Core across the United States. The blue states never adopted Common Core. Go them. The red states were states where there was active resistance. This was back in May of 2013. And then the gray states were still kind of, waiting for reality to hit. But here we are today, okay? Wow. Yes, this is what's happening all across the United States. Again, they knew you weren't going to like it, so they kept it quiet. Now that people know about it, when they see the evidence coming home in backpacks and showing up on kitchen tables, guys, all politics is local, and it does not get more local than your kitchen table. So when it's showing up on the kitchen table, parents are outraged. They're understanding what this is. They're approaching their school district employees and asking, what can we do about this? And being told, our hands are tied. Go see your legislator. I've literally watched it happen. The good news is we do have folks fighting for us. I just want to mention just a couple. Your Senator Marco Rubio has said that he believes that this is unconstitutional and violates 3 federal laws. The Republicans, The Republican National Committee has passed a resolution condemning Common Core as a straitjacket on academic freedom and achievement. The RPOF here in Florida has had 3 committees that have passed resolutions. The most recent said this. They recommended and urged, this is the Legislative Affairs Committee said, they recommended and urged that the Florida legislature cease implementation of Common Core standards, also known as Florida's Next Generation. They made clear, right? And then they said in the absence of legislative action, they were urging Governor Scott to immediately cease implementation of Common Core standards by any name. They got it in the state of Florida. Yeah, we'd be grateful. This is just a list of other groups that you may recognize, because I just want you to know, when you go in and you speak to your principal or you speak to your school district employee, you'll be made to feel like you're an outlier. You are just this strange where you just don't get it. You don't understand. You're not. You are really part of the majority, but they like to hush you up. So I want you to see that there are wonderful groups that are standing with you and credentialed people that are backing you up, so don't allow them to hush you. And finally, I'll close with this. Parents and grandparents in this room, you are the most important textbook that your child will ever have. They're watching you. You set the example and they follow. we have a responsibility right now to stand for something. We're at a crucial point here in the state of Florida. And so I want to refer back to one of the people that inspires me. This is Sam Adams. This is 4 years before the Declaration of Independence was signed. But he was out there educating the people and helping them to understand why it was not okay to sit by idly and allow their rights to be taken. And he said this, "The right to freedom being the gift of God Almighty, it is not in the power of man to alienate this gift and voluntarily become a slave." Let me break that down for you in case we don't get all that. God gave you that gift. He gave you the gift of freedom. He gave you the gift of raising and rearing your children in the admonition of the Lord. He gave you a huge gift. And here in America, we've experienced amazing prosperity and blessing because we followed the plan. Now, we have an opportunity. Are we going to alienate? To alienate means to separate. Are we going to separate ourselves from that gift? Well, Sam Adams says it's not in the power of man. It's not allowed. You can't just back off that gift that God has given you. To do so would be like slapping God in the face and saying, I don't want that gift. It's not in your power to alienate that gift that God has given you and voluntarily become a slave. We face that decision today. We are at that point. Are we going to roll over and voluntarily become a slave, or are we going to stand and fight for ourselves and for our posterity? I pray that you'll continue to fight with us. Thank you.